All right, welcome back, everybody. On a Tuesday, we were supposed to start half an hour ago. My guest, Elnatan Rudolph, today was patient enough for me to move locations where I had better Wi-Fi, so we could have a better interview. So I appreciate everyone joining, and sorry to have technical difficulties, Elnatan, during week 8. I thought I would have had this figured out, but being back in New Orleans, it's tricky. So I'm bouncing around locations. But thank you so much for joining me. Before we start, I always ask, where are you right now?
I am in Hackensack, New Jersey today, heading to Orlando tomorrow.
That's all. I know you're back and forth to Florida a lot because your business Converge is based down there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Converge and what you guys do?
Yeah, so Converge, we've got 3 components to Converge. We've got government affairs, where we do primarily lobbying. Within that, we've got a multi-state practice where we oversee large government affairs initiatives throughout many states. We've got local, where we lobby in the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County, as well as the Tri-County, which is Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach. We do legislative government affairs in Florida. And we've recently opened up a New York City government affairs office as well. Then we've got Converge GPS, which is Converge Global Public Solutions, where we do communications and campaigns, as well as fundraising for campaigns. We run campaigns, ballot initiatives, and then we've got Converge Digital, where we do mostly digital for large-scale campaigns.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, and I know, and that's fascinating. A lot on your plate. I know that back in the day when you were 18, you started a political consulting firm. So this isn't your first rodeo. Tell us a little bit about that. I started Herald when I was 24, but 18 is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. So right out of high school, I mean, I worked on political campaigns just like you did through high school. I met your dad when I was, I think a sophomore or junior in high school, working on local races in Brooklyn. And right when I got back from my year in Israel, I was studying at Brooklyn College by day and running local political campaigns by afternoon and evening. And spent a bunch of years doing judicial races, as well as local legislative assembly, city council, and state senate races in Brooklyn. And then about 3 years later, joined up with Hank Shankoff to work on much larger campaigns, and I went to work for Hank for 8 years, and then sort of graduated from there, started my own firm again, and then did a race down in Florida, and for the past about 15 years, I've been doing races around the country, but a lot of day-to-day races throughout Florida.
That's awesome. So what got you interested in politics, initially? I know I grew up in it, so I didn't really have a choice. And then I made the choice to leave. You never really leave it. Your ear is always to the ground, and you're always involved and always dealing with wonderful people like you and Michael Cohen, who's our guest later this week. We've all worked together. But what was your initial spark of interest? Why get involved in politics?
So as a young kid, my dad was involved in Rudy Giuliani's campaign in 1993. And I stayed active. I would go with him to events, and I always looked older than I was. And then by 1997, when Rudy was running for re-election, I was running my first city council race at the time in Brooklyn, actually against Anthony Weiner, who was a little known city councilman at the time, and no one really knew his name. And I just
that New York Post cover really helped, though.
And I just really loved politics, loved campaigns, but most of all, always at a young age wanted to figure out how to bring technology to political campaigns. So when I was 16, I got a political mentor of mine to fund me purchasing all the publicly available email lists. We cross-referenced it with the voter file in New York City. And we sent out emails back in 1997 and 98 for political campaigns. Everyone told me that's never going to go anywhere. You're wasting your time. No one's going to ever send out emails for political campaigns. And I sort of dropped it. I said, okay, everyone knows better than me. So if everyone says that it won't be done, I'm not going to focus on it. And I went on to focus on more traditional campaigns, day-to-day street operators. Sorry, my dog's barking.
No worries.
Day-to-day street operations, direct mail, TV, and then over time moved into doing digital for campaigns. I designed some of the first apps for campaigns back in 2013 in New York City. I launched a firm doing apps for political campaigns. And then again, people at the time were like, "Oh, you're wasting your time. No one's gonna use apps for political campaigns." We actually did a app for the UFT, the United Federation of Teachers, and we had over 90,000 downloads of the app at that time. And then right after that, Chris Quinn copied and did an app as well. And then it became fashionable for folks to do apps for campaigns. But my focus has always been on trying to take technology that is used and publicly available in the rest of the world and try to get campaigns which are usually 5 to even 10 years behind the rest of the world.
Did you ever think about, if you had stuck with the email thing and not listened to the naysayers? Because you were way ahead of the curve.
Oh, I've thought about it many a times, and like the reality is, as things go, things become commodities. So you only get a certain run rate of it. I mean, I remember back when I started campaigns, I was paying 50 cents for a robocall and charging clients, 60 cents, and it was reasonable. Today, you're paying 3 cents for a robocall. So you have a 10-year run rate when you introduce something new before everyone else is copying it, and then it just becomes commoditized, and it's who's got the most money to try to get the larger clients.
Yeah, now there's massive platforms within the political space that are specialized for, again, I won't, I know they're on both sides of the aisle, so we won't advertise for them here, but there's definitely tons of technology and digital advertising marketing within, within the political realm. On that note, because you're Mr. Technology within politics, I have to talk about today, which is, the New York State primary. And again, I'm very lucky that I don't think we planned it this way, but it works out that, that my guests match up with the times. You're a technology guy. I think that many people thought that when when Corona hit, the pandemic hit, primaries would get pushed, and I know some got pushed in other states, but that we would move into a direction of technology and app-based voting, or voting with using your social security number, your face ID, or whatever it is. But they made the decision in New York State and in other states to go to mail-in and paper ballots. What's your thought on that? And then I definitely want to dive into, there were some big screw ups today by the New York City Board of Elections that we should dive into as well.
Look, I mean, the reality is, as much as campaigns are 10 years behind the time, Board of Elections are 30 years behind the time. I mean, the New York City Board of Elections just recently moved from the lever voting machines, which you and I, that was the first thing we used to vote on. And that was the first thing that our dads voted on, and probably our grandparents in New York voted on. And it was probably the same exact machine that you first voted, your dad first voted, and your grandparents voted on. So you can't expect boards of elections that live in the dark ages, that are also underfunded. The last place that any municipality or local government puts money in is into their elections. You would need a complete overhaul of the entire country's electoral process to do anything more. So, New York City, New Jersey, I mean, in my town in Teaneck, we had an election in May. It was all vote by mail. New Jersey, now for their primary for July, moved to an all vote by mail. So every single registered voter received a ballot. That's probably the most direct and easiest way for them to do it. And that's also filled with issues. In Teaneck, I know people, and my councilman, Keith Kaplan, has been doing research on this to find people who mailed their ballot and it was never received. So, here they voted, they filled everything out fine, put it in the mail, and never voted. So there is no perfect way until one day where we move to whether it's app-based or online. But even then, the reality is, a 93-year-old senior who has voted every election since she was 18, is she going to be able to use online? So there is no perfect way to do it. And especially now in a quick, here you go, here's a pandemic, now go and figure out how to do something different, makes it even more difficult for government that does not move at a rapid speed. You and I, Corona hits, we move with technology. We move, we bootstrap and say, what do we got to do to keep business going? The last part of government that does that is the elections department. So they're hamstrung. I mean, they've got to work with their budget that's pre-allocated a year in advance, and now they're told you got to figure it out. And the reality is, as you know well from business, usually you could throw money at things and make them better. They're not able to do that. So, and usually whether it's the supervisor of elections or the commissioners of the elections department, they're not up with the times. They don't know, what technology is about. So they're stuck with what should we do?
I mean, I know like state by state, folks have like integrated some technologies or have tried to in various states. Do you think that it's an issue or a fear of hacking? I mean, is it tied to that
No,
at all?
look, I'll be honest. I think that's a made up, 2016 and now 2020. Whoever feared that before 2016, whether it's the Democrats who say Russia helped Trump, or whether it's Trump who says the Russians were helping the Democrats. There was never any fear of that. And I mean, I don't think the average business lives day to day, fully worried about hacking. And there's always ways to counteract that. But now, because of this, whether it's real or perceived fear, that will set back the potential to do anything by many years. I mean, in Florida, we've been doing vote by mail forever. Vote by mail in Florida, you actually have 3 distinct elections. You have vote by mail, where a third of people vote by mail. You have a third who vote early and a third who vote on election day. Vote by mail runs completely smoothly. Now you have the president saying, "Oh, we can't trust voting by mail." So I don't think I think it's something that's been made up, and because of that, it's now in people's psyche. So it's going to be very difficult to overcome that.
That's an interesting perspective, and I'm happy to hear that, because I think that the technology, could be there, but I agree that it's definitely going to be set back because of fear. But I think that if there were secure ways to do it, we'd have to find a trusted party. But I think it's something that we should move towards, because to me, to have paper ballots, I understand it's unprecedented times, but it just seems like ass backwards,
Yep.
by far. So, all right, so
agreed.
All right, so tell us, what's it like to operate a business in Florida, and I know you're down there quite often. So, what's it like to bounce back and forth?
I mean, the most difficult thing was spending 11 weeks without traveling. It was probably my first time in about a decade not being on a plane in 11 weeks. I say my commute to Miami is shorter than some of my friends commute from the suburbs of New Jersey into Manhattan.
Ain't that true?
I could get on a 6 a.m. flight. I could be in Midtown Miami in my office at 9 o'clock. I've had times where I've gotten on a plane at LaGuardia and beat one of my colleagues who lives in Fort Lauderdale down to the office in Miami. So when planes work and when flights work, it's great. The winter, working in Florida is great for the winter time. As my wife says, she doesn't have to check the weather forecast. She knows when I'm getting on a plane early that it's going to snow the next day. So, I mean, I spend a large part of my winter bouncing between Tallahassee, usually sometime between January or March. Sometime the legislative session in Florida starts either January for 60 days or March, depending on election year. So I'll be in Tallahassee and then in Miami the other part of the time.
That's awesome. And what's it like to juggle that with family? I know your family's back in Jersey. Is it tough to be away that much?
So as I say, and as my wife says, the difference is I'll go for 2 or 3 days, and then when I'm home, I work from home. And so the 4 days a week I'm home. I'm doing carpool, making lunches, helping my kids with homework. So in aggregate, I'm home more than I'm not, and I'm home more than others who go to an office every day. So the days that I'm home, I'm actually home and work from my home office. And then the 2 or 3 days that I gotta be in Miami, my kids and my wife have become very accustomed to it. Sometimes if I go 2 weeks straight without being home, with being home, my wife will be like, are you still working? Like, why are you still home? Don't you have meetings in Florida? Or my kids will be like, you're cramping our style. Like, that's not how we do it on Tuesday. You're supposed to be away on Tuesday. So it's a juggle.
Pizza night. It's pizza night.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a juggle, but my kids are like, it's takeout night. Why are you home wanting to cook a dinner? Like, we want that takeout that we do every other Tuesday. But it's a struggle, but thankfully, we've become accustomed to it. As a family, also when I'm not working, we travel a lot. We spend 2 weeks a year in St. Martin. Last year we went to Europe for 3 weeks. So, when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm not, I try to be home as much as possible.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to compartmentalize. What do you what do you think about the response and everything that, again, since you're plugged into Florida, the response to COVID? I know that you work with folks on both sides of the aisle. I mean, like, what do you think it's been, and like, what do you hear about this increase and uptick in cases in Florida?
Look, the reality is, I'm taking my family tomorrow. We're driving down to Orlando for 3 weeks, and everyone's like, "Oh, I can't believe you're doing that." Florida's rates are skyrocketing. The reality is, what's happening in Florida, I believe we're going to see that in New Jersey and New York in 3 weeks a month. Florida opened a month ago, May 11th. They started opening statewide. May 18th, they opened in Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach. So it's already a month that they've been open. The biggest difference in what you're seeing now versus what you saw before is they're prepared. The biggest problem we had, no one said we need to stay home until we have a vaccine. If that's the case, then let's lock ourselves in until who knows when. Dr. Fauci said today it's not going to be that quick. So, we could lock ourselves in for the next year. The reality is that as states open, you're going to see an increase. That's just, science, and that's just, mathematics. But, when this first hit, places like New York and South Florida, California in March, the biggest issue was the hospitals were not prepared. Today, the hospitals in South Florida are ready for 5 times the amount of patients they had on the busiest day. They have ventilators. New York has ventilators. That was one of the biggest issues months ago, was ventilators. I mean, my phone was blowing up with people who wanted to sell ventilators to government and hospitals. People who wanted to sell PPE equipment. Today, and back then, you read the stories of hospitals that weren't prepared. And I represent nurses union in South Florida that at Jackson Hospital, which is the largest public hospital in South Florida. And the stories that I hear from them of what it was like when they had to wash their gowns, they had to, reuse masks. Today, you could get masks, they're a dime a dozen. That's no longer an issue. Everyone has their own mask. The hospitals have plenty of masks. So also, I think it's important to watch actual data versus, the left and the right both like to point different things. Florida, the largest numbers are 18 to 35-year-olds right now. The reality is they weren't being careful, but also the average 18 to 35-year-old won't even know that they have it. And even when the president says, "Oh, we're testing a lot more, so we're finding a lot more," when I went 2 months ago to try to get a test, I waited online in Englewood, New Jersey, for 4 hours, and then they were out of tests. Today, you could go into any urgent care and go get a test. You could go to your doctor's office and go get a test. So, it's really easy. It used to be 2 months ago, it was only the people who were really, really sick got tested. Now everyone could go get tested. So we don't know what the numbers really would have been back in March and April versus today. If everyone was able to get tested like they are today, the numbers likely would have been a lot higher back then, which would make today's numbers not look as great.
But the problem would have been the hospitals.
But the problem wouldn't have been the hospitals if all those 18 to 34-year-olds who didn't need hospitalization. The problem still was the hospitals. but we would have just known bigger numbers, because they wouldn't have needed hospitalizations. I mean, when day camps here in New York, New Jersey open up, in the next week or two, you're going to see numbers go up. I mean, they're going to require testing of all those kids. They're going to find all these kids that have it. They're going to, these kids are going to spread it amongst themselves. And back in your hometown of Englewood, there's no, people are ready. The kids, it can't be cooped up anymore. They're, when it was okay, you have to be cooped up because you're in school all day. Now it's beautiful out, and the kids are out there playing together. So you can't stop that, and they're carriers, and they're going to get it and pass it on to others. So as long as the hospitalization rate doesn't go up and the intubation rate doesn't go up, but I mean, the biggest difference, for instance, between the governor of Florida and what occurred in Florida versus New York and New Jersey were in the senior centers and the long-term care facilities. And that, Governor DeSantis in Florida shut down the long-term care facilities day one. And you weren't able to go in and out, and they had much lower numbers than here in New York and New Jersey.
That's interesting. What do you think about? I mean, in the state that I'm in right now, in Louisiana, we were in phase 2, and my daughter's camp opened up last week, and they have these little groups of pods, like 7 kids, 3 teachers, and
Yep.
they recommend that you stay in that pod. You socialize with that pod and have play dates only with that pod, so that if the pod gets taken out by a case, boom. But we're in phase 2. We're about to hit.
Let's be realistic. Those kids are going home at the end of the night. Those kids have siblings. Those kids, so you're in a pod with 7 kids. They each have an average of 2 siblings that they're going home to, and 2 parents. So you're not with seven kids. You're with 28 people. And their parents are going out to the supermarket or going back to work, now you're in phase 2. They're going to get a haircut or going out shopping and dining. So it's not realistic, and so.
Well, do you think the rollback? What do you think? So I mean, the governor, paused us in phase 2 for 28 days. Do you think that's worthwhile, or just
look, I think that's going to it's reactionary. It's reactionary, and that's going to keep on happening. In New York and New Jersey, as soon as the numbers go up, Andrew Cuomo will go back to his daily briefings.
His arms are very jacked. I gotta give him that.
Look, my 12-year-old son, that was his lunch break every day for school, was watching Andrew Cuomo. And when you got to watch Cuomo Prime Time and you had Chris and Andrew Cuomo on there together, it was a great show. But as you open up, and right now he's just playing a pissing match with the governor of Florida, because the governor of Florida said that if you're coming from New York and New Jersey, and now I've flown to Florida, I've driven to Florida, and they stop you. And when you get off a flight from LaGuardia, you have to fill out paperwork. When you drive down from New York and New Jersey, there's a checkpoint, and you have to fill out paperwork. So now Cuomo is just trying to say, okay, you did that to me, I'm going to do that back to you. And they're having a pissing match.
It seems like the White House and some of our world leaders just happening locally.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's just how it is. They're all posturing. Chances are you'll see, Ron DeSantis running for president on the Republican ticket, and you're going to see Andrew Cuomo running for president on the Democratic ticket. So, they're already playing the long game and trying to beat each other up, as well as they're trying to, Andrew Cuomo is a big backer of Joe Biden, and Ron DeSantis is probably the #1 Donald Trump guy. So they're helping their respective nominees. But it's important to listen to doctors and really, follow science and not just listen to what the media is saying.
I as a PR person, I don't know if I should agree to that, but I definitely, I think I understand.
As a PR person, we could both appreciate that. We know I and Hank Shankoff, who back in the day and probably it was one of the most quoted political consultants in the country because he was the most quoted guy in New York. Therefore, that made him the most quoted. Used to say, reporters have a lot on their plate, and you've got to package it and deliver it to them. So and it's whoever delivers the best product to them that's what they're going to go with. They don't have the time to go and follow every single story. So they're taking what they are reporting as fact, very often from somewhere else. So they report it as fact, but they're trusting, whoever it is that they trust, that their facts are accurate.
Well, you're right. As a PR person, we definitely have to play the middle and always understand that there's two sides to every story for sure. I wasn't going to touch upon it, but I think I have to, because you're, national, political consultant. What's your thought on the election? I mean, do you like, there's so much going on. There's so many outside factors, unprecedented events going on in our world. How do you think it affects the election? What do you see happening?
There's so much unprecedented. You can make an argument that everything going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the civil unrest, helps Joe Biden. You can make an argument that it helps Donald Trump. I've heard friends and colleagues make both arguments. I have no idea. What will be? I think it's like 134 days or something from now. Who knows? The president will do his convention in Jacksonville. I booked my ticket, and he'll have a huge crowd, a huge stadium. And the Democrats may very well just have a Zoom convention. And that can give a huge boost to the president and could hurt the Democrats. Or you could see a scenario where folks in Jacksonville, which is already seeing an uptick in the amount of COVID cases from people just going out to bars and restaurants, and the beach, what will be between now and August 24th, when their convention starts, you could see this huge uptick, and then all of a sudden, the convention has to be canceled at the last minute. Or as you saw from the Tulsa rally, where now Trump campaign staffers have been diagnosed positive COVID. Really, you can make the argument both ways that what's going on helps Joe Biden. You can make the argument that if all these people who are becoming more active and involved go and vote, which usually you don't see, it doesn't translate to that. And each time we had that, I will tell you, I recall a campaign that you probably remember from when you were in high school, back in Brooklyn, when Anthony Weiner ran for Congress for Chuck Schumer's seat in 1998 against Noach Deer. Noach Deer had more contributors from the Syrian community in Brooklyn than he got votes, and then Anthony Weiner got votes. And if every single person who had contributed money to him had just gotten out to vote for him. Noah Beer, who recently passed away, would have been a congressman, and most of us would never have heard of Anthony Weiner or Carlos Danger or any of the other names he likes to go by. So, I think people don't translate. You don't see very often the civil unrest translating into election day. If election day was today, most of these people in CHOP, Chaz, whatever you want to call it, are now in Washington, the Black House Autonomous Zone. I guarantee you, most of those people either are not registered to vote or won't ever go out to vote, or won't go out to vote. They'll stand there in the street protesting, but they won't vote. There's a disconnect between this civil unrest, that the best way to do something about it is to vote. And if you went out and voted, then you could do something about it. If you just yell and scream and tear down monuments and throw things at police officers, that's not going to change anything. So I don't believe that things are going to change. I don't believe that this will make a difference to elections, as well as young people. If every young person who went on TikTok and screwed around with the president's rally, if all those folks voted, they'd make a difference. But you and I know, when we were 18 and we were politically active, how many of our friends actually got out to vote?
Not many.
So
they were chilling on the couch. They were chilling on the
exactly.
couch. But I did get a lot of my friends to volunteer, as I'm sure you did.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And where was his fundraiser used to be? Where, at Lundy's, Carlos? Right? That's where she said Bay, right? And she said, yeah, for sure. So before we wrap up, and I appreciate that's awesome insight and very true. And I think it's still very much undecided. And I also encourage, as you do, young folks to get out. I mean, I think it's super important. I think that too many people think that their vote won't count, or just disenfranchised voters.
To that, I also believe that with social media has made it so easy for people to just voice their opinion, and they think that's they'll sooner tweet about it and go on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat and complain or talk about politics, but not actually translate into going out to vote. And if those folks actually went out to vote, that would make a difference.
So before we wrap up, tell everyone where can you be found online? Where can Converge be found online? ConvergeGPS.com. Okay, cool. All right, Elnatan, I really appreciate you joining me again. Sorry for the glitch at the beginning.
No worries. Regards to your dad.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and safe travels to Florida.
Anytime. Look forward to seeing you back here in Jersey.